After my son died, I never told his wife about the $12 million house and company he left in my name. She thought everything belonged to her. 3 days later, she tried to feed me poisoned food while shoutingly said, "You are old, you don't need all of these, just hand them over." While she pushed me and then kicked me. Her sister added, "Some old people just don't know when to step aside." What she tried to do left me in absolute shock when she actually attempted to smother me with a pillow while I pretended to be unconscious from the poison. But before I was about to lose conscious, I dialed 911, and when they arrived, they left everyone in utter shock. My name is Margaret, and I'm 68 years old. 6 weeks ago, I lost my son David in a car accident. He was only 42, married to a woman named Jessica for 5 years, and was the light of my life. What followed his death was something I never could have imagined, even in my darkest nightmares. David was incredibly successful. He built a software company from the ground up that was worth millions, owned several properties including a stunning $12 million mansion in the hills, and had investments that most people could only dream of. But here's what Jessica didn't know, and what I kept to myself after the funeral: David had changed his will 6 months before he died. See, David had started having problems with Jessica about a year before his death. He'd confided in me during our weekly coffee meetings that she'd become increasingly demanding about money, wanting expensive vacations, designer clothes, and jewelry that cost more than most people's cars. She'd also started making comments about how I was taking up too much space in their lives and how David should focus on his wife, not his mother. The final straw came when David discovered Jessica had been having an affair with her personal trainer, Marcus. David hired a private investigator and had concrete proof, but instead of confronting her immediately, he did something that would prove to be prophetic. He went to his lawyer, Robert Chen, and completely rewrote his will. In the new will, everything went to me. The house, the company, the investments, the cars, everything. David left Jessica a modest $50,000 and a note that said, "You'll understand why when the truth comes out." He also left detailed instructions for me about how he wanted his assets handled and a letter explaining his reasoning. I only learned about this will change when Robert called me 3 days after the funeral. David had instructed him to wait until after the burial to inform me, and also requested a brief period for initial grief processing before handling legal matters. When Robert sat me down in his office and explained what David had done, I was stunned. The letter David left for me was heartbreaking. "Mom," it read, "if you're reading this, something has happened to me. I found out about Jessica's affair, but more than that, I discovered she's been systematically trying to isolate me from you and has been stealing money from my personal accounts. I've documented everything. She doesn't love me, Mom. She loves what I can provide. I'm changing my will because I know that if something happens to me, she'll try to take everything and leave you with nothing. You're the only person who ever loved me unconditionally. Please use these assets wisely, and don't let her manipulate you. I've left evidence of her affair and theft in the safe deposit box. The key is taped under your coffee table drawer. I love you. David." Reading that letter, I felt a mixture of heartbreak and anger I'd never experienced. My son had known he was in danger, somehow. He'd prepared for the worst and tried to protect me even from beyond the grave. But here's the thing, I decided not to tell Jessica about the will immediately. Robert advised me that legally, I had no obligation to inform her right away, and something in my gut told me to wait. I wanted to see how she'd behave, whether she'd show any genuine grief for my son or reveal her true colors. I didn't have to wait long. At the funeral, Jessica played the grieving widow perfectly. She wore a stunning black Valentino dress that probably cost $5,000, dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief, and accepted condolences with gracious nods. But I noticed she spent more time checking her phone than actually mourning, and I caught her whispering with her sister Amanda about making sure all the paperwork was in order. The day after the funeral, Jessica asked to meet with me. She suggested we meet at David's house, which she was already calling my house. I agreed, curious to see what she had to say. When I arrived, I noticed that David's personal photos with me had already been removed from the living room. But that wasn't all. Jessica had also removed David's favorite books, the chess set we used to play with together, and even his collection of vintage jazz records that he'd been building since college. In their place were Jessica's fashion magazines and what looked like real estate brochures for expensive vacation homes. The sight of it made my heart ache. David had loved this house not for its monetary value, but because it was where he felt most comfortable, surrounded by things that meant something to him. Jessica was already erasing his memory, turning his sanctuary into her showcase. She greeted me with a cold smile and gestured for me to sit on the couch. She sat across from me, crossed her legs, and got straight to the point. But before she could speak, I noticed something else that chilled me. On the coffee table were several legal documents, and I could see David's name on them. Jessica had clearly been busy. "Margaret, before we begin, I want to show you something," she said, her voice taking on a patronizing tone. She picked up one of the documents. This is David's life insurance policy. $2 million, payable to me as his wife. And this," she held up another paper, "is the deed to this house, which is now being transferred into my name." She was lying, of course. I knew from Robert that David had changed his life insurance beneficiary to me as well, but I said nothing. "I've also been in contact with David's business partners," she continued. "They're very eager to work with me to transition the company ownership. Apparently, David had mentioned to them that he wanted to make sure I was taken care of if anything happened to him." Another lie. David's business partners, particularly his co-founder Mike, had never liked Jessica. David had confided in me that Mike had warned him about Jessica's spending habits and her attempts to involve herself in business decisions she didn't understand. "That's interesting," I said carefully. "David never mentioned any of this to me." Jessica's smile became even colder. "Well, Margaret, there are probably a lot of things David didn't share with you. We're married, after all. Spouses tend to be each other's confidants about financial matters." The irony was almost laughable. David had shared everything with me because he'd stopped trusting Jessica months ago. But I maintained my composure. "Margaret, I know this is a difficult time for both of us, but we need to discuss the practical matters. As David's wife, I've inherited everything, of course. The house, the business, all the investments. I've already been in touch with the accountants and lawyers to begin transferring everything into my name." I kept my face neutral. "Have you now?" "Yes, and I want you to know that while I'll be making some changes, I don't want you to worry about your living situation. I'm willing to let you stay in your current apartment, and I'll even continue David's monthly allowance to you for a reasonable period." The audacity was breathtaking. David had been giving me $3,000 a month, not because I needed it, but because he wanted to make sure I was comfortable. I had my own savings and pension, but David insisted. Now Jessica was talking about it like charity she was graciously offering. "That's very kind of you," I said carefully. Jessica's smile widened. "I thought you'd appreciate that. Of course, I'll need you to sign some paperwork acknowledging that you have no claim to David's estate. Just a formality, but my lawyer insists on it." "And what if I don't sign?" Her smile faltered slightly. "Margaret, let's not make this difficult. We both know that as David's wife, I have legal right to his assets. I'm trying to be generous here." I stood up. "I think I need some time to process all of this, Jessica. It's only been 2 days since we buried my son." Her mask slipped completely for just a moment, and I saw cold calculation in her eyes. "Of course. Take your time. But don't take too much time. I have plans for this estate, and I'd like to move forward soon." Over the next 2 weeks, Jessica called me repeatedly, becoming increasingly insistent that I sign her papers. She also started making subtle threats, suggesting that if I didn't cooperate, she might have to reevaluate her generosity regarding my monthly allowance. But Jessica's behavior became increasingly erratic as the days passed. She started showing up at my apartment unannounced, sometimes with Amanda in tow. During one particularly uncomfortable visit, she brought a locksmith and tried to convince me to give her copies of any keys David might have given me to his properties. "It's just for security purposes," she explained when I questioned her. "I need to make sure all the locks are changed and that only authorized people have access." When I refused, claiming I didn't have any such keys, her mask slipped for a moment and I saw pure rage flash across her face. Amanda, meanwhile, was making herself comfortable in David's house as if she owned it. When I stopped by one afternoon to pick up a photo of David that Jessica had forgotten to remove, I found Amanda lounging by the pool in a designer bikini, talking loudly on her phone about party plans. "Oh, this place is perfect for entertaining," she was saying to whoever was on the other end of the call. "The pool area alone could hold 50 people easily. And wait until you see the wine cellar. We're talking about bottles that cost more than most people's rent." When she saw me, Amanda barely acknowledged my presence, just waved dismissively and continued her phone conversation. The disrespect was staggering. My son had been dead for less than a week, and these women were already planning parties in his home. I also discovered that Jessica had been telling people around town a very different story about David's finances. At the grocery store, I ran into David's neighbor, Patricia, who offered her condolences and then said something that made my blood run cold. "I'm so sorry about David, Margaret. Jessica told me about the financial troubles he was having before he died. She said the stress of possibly losing the house and business might have contributed to the accident. I had no idea things were so bad for him." Financial troubles? David's company had been more profitable than ever. I realized Jessica was spreading lies to make her eventual inheritance seem more dramatic, positioning herself as the grieving widow who had to heroically save David's failing empire. Meanwhile, I was quietly meeting with Robert Chen, learning about my new responsibilities as the actual inheritor of David's estate. The scope of David's wealth was staggering. Beyond the $12 million mansion, there was a software company worth approximately $15 million, a portfolio of rental properties worth another $8 million, stock investments worth $6 million, and various other assets including art, jewelry, and additional investments totaling another $4 million. In total, David had left me an estate worth over $45 million. But Robert also shared some disturbing information he'd uncovered while reviewing David's financial records. In the months before his death, David had hired a private security consultant to sweep his house and car for tracking devices or other surveillance equipment. He'd found several small GPS trackers on his car and what appeared to be listening devices in his home office. David was being stalked, Margaret, Robert told me grimly. Someone was monitoring his every move. The security consultant's report is in David's files, along with photos of the devices they found. The report was chilling. It detailed how someone with intimate access to David's home and vehicle had placed sophisticated surveillance equipment to track his movements and conversations. The security consultant had recommended David contact the police, but David had decided to handle the matter privately, not wanting to alarm me or escalate tensions with Jessica if she was indeed responsible. David had also hired a forensic accountant to audit his personal and business finances after discovering unexplained transactions. The audit revealed that someone with access to David's accounts had been systematically stealing money for over 2 years, using a complex system of fake vendor payments and redirected transfers to hide the theft. The total amount stolen was approximately $185,000, Robert explained. David had traced it back to Jessica, but he was still gathering evidence when he died. He wanted to have an airtight case before confronting her. This new information painted an even darker picture of Jessica's true nature. She hadn't just been cheating on David emotionally, she'd been systematically robbing him while planning his death. The sophistication of her schemes suggested this wasn't her first time manipulating and stealing from a wealthy husband. Robert explained that Jessica would eventually have to be informed, but there was no legal requirement to do so immediately. He also showed me the evidence David had gathered about Jessica's affair and the money she'd been stealing from him. Bank records showed she'd been transferring money to personal accounts David didn't know about, totaling nearly $185,000 over the past 2 years. David was very thorough, Robert told me. He documented everything. If Jessica tries to contest the will, this evidence will show she was stealing from him and committing adultery, which under the prenup she signed, would forfeit her right to any assets anyway. I asked Robert to give me 1 more week before we formally notified Jessica about the will. I wanted to see just how far she'd go in her deception. That's when things took a dark turn. But before the dinner that would change everything, I had one more disturbing encounter with Jessica that should have been a red flag. 1 week before she invited me to dinner, she showed up at my apartment with a man I'd never seen before. She introduced him as Dr. Stephen Walsh, claiming he was a grief counselor who specialized in helping elderly people cope with loss. "Margaret, I'm worried about you," Jessica said with fake concern. "You seem confused lately, and I think you're having trouble processing David's death. Dr. Walsh here thinks you might benefit from some medication to help you through this difficult time." Dr. Walsh, who struck me as more of a used car salesman than a medical professional, immediately began asking me invasive questions about my mental state, my sleeping habits, and whether I was experiencing any confusion or memory problems. "Sometimes when people your age experience significant trauma," he said condescendingly, "they can develop temporary cognitive issues. I have some medication samples that might help clear your thinking." I politely declined, saying I preferred to grieve naturally and that I had my own doctor if I needed help. Jessica became visibly frustrated, insisting that I owed it to David's memory to take care of my mental health. When I continued to refuse, Dr. Walsh suddenly became very interested in my living situation, asking pointed questions about whether I lived alone and if I had any family nearby who checked on me regularly. After they left, something nagged at me about the interaction. I called my real doctor, Dr. Martinez, and described the visit. She was immediately concerned. "Margaret, no legitimate grief counselor makes house calls with medication samples, especially to someone they've never evaluated properly. That sounds like someone trying to establish a paper trail to suggest you're mentally incompetent. Did you get this man's credentials?" I hadn't, and when I tried to look up Dr. Stephen Walsh online, I found no licensed mental health professional by that name in our area. Jessica had brought a fake doctor to my home, probably hoping to get me on medication that would make me seem confused or incompetent, which would support any future claims that I wasn't mentally capable of handling legal or financial matters. The realization that Jessica was already planning to have me declared mentally unfit was terrifying. If her plan had worked, she could have had me committed or declared incompetent, giving her control over any assets I might have had, including David's inheritance once she discovered the truth about the will. Later investigation would reveal that Dr. Walsh was actually Marcus's cousin, Tony Walsh, who had briefly worked as an orderly at a psychiatric facility before being fired for forging documents. Jessica had paid him $500 to pose as a doctor and try to establish documentation of my supposed mental incompetence. 3 weeks after David's funeral, Jessica invited me to dinner. She said she wanted to clear the air and discuss our future relationship. She offered to cook for me at David's house, saying it would be more private than a restaurant. I should have known something was wrong the moment I walked in. Jessica was being overly sweet, almost manic in her cheerfulness. She'd prepared what she claimed was David's favorite meal, roast beef with roasted vegetables and red wine. But David was vegetarian, something Jessica apparently never bothered to learn about her own husband. Amanda was there too, which surprised me. Jessica introduced her as being there for moral support during this difficult conversation. Amanda had always been rude to me, making snide comments about my age and how I was too involved in David's life. She was a failed actress turned social media influencer, living off Jessica's generosity and whatever money she could con from men she met online. During dinner, Jessica kept pushing me to eat and drink more. "You need to keep your strength up, Margaret. This must be so hard on you at your age." She kept refilling my wine glass and encouraging me to try more food. About halfway through the meal, I started feeling strange. Dizzy, nauseous, and my vision was becoming slightly blurry. That's when Jessica's demeanor completely changed. "You know, Margaret, I've been thinking about our conversation the other day," she said, her voice losing all pretense of sweetness. "You're being really unreasonable about signing those papers." I tried to speak, but my tongue felt somewhat thick and heavy. The room had a slight spinning sensation. "You're old," Jessica continued, standing up and beginning to pace around the table. "You don't need all of these assets. Just hand them over." As she said this, she shoved my shoulder hard, nearly knocking me out of my chair. I was so dizzy and weak that I couldn't properly defend myself. "Jessica, what did you do to me?" I managed to whisper. "Oh, just a little something to help you see reason," she laughed cruelly. "Amanda suggested it, actually. A crushed-up sleeping pill in your wine and a small amount of a mild sedative in your food. Nothing dangerous, but enough to make you more compliant." Amanda chimed in from across the room where she was now standing with her arms crossed. "Some old people just don't know when to step aside. You've had your time, Margaret. Now it's Jessica's turn to enjoy what David worked for." Jessica kicked my chair then, and I fell to the floor, too weak to get back up. "Sign the papers, Margaret, and we'll call you an ambulance. Refuse, and, well, accidents happen to old people all the time." I was terrified, but I was also angry. These two women were willing to assault and poison me for money that wasn't even legally theirs. As I lay on the floor, pretending to be more unconscious than I was, I listened to them plan. "How much did you give her?" Jessica asked Amanda. "Just what you said, one sleeping pill and a small dose of that veterinary sedative Marcus got us. She should be drowsy and confused but not unconscious. We need her awake enough to sign." "Maybe we should have given her more," Jessica mused. "This is taking too long." "No," Amanda said firmly. "Too much could actually hurt her, and that would bring too much attention." But then Jessica's impatience got the better of her, and she had her most horrifying idea. "You know what? I'm tired of waiting. Let's just finish this now." I heard her walk to the linen closet and return with what sounded like a pillow. Through barely open eyes, I saw her approaching me. "What are you doing?" Amanda whispered. "Making this look like she choked on her own vomit after the meal. Tragic, but not suspicious." Jessica knelt down beside me and pressed the pillow over my face. Although the drugs had made me drowsy and weak, I was still conscious enough to hold my breath while she applied pressure. The seconds felt like hours, and I knew I had to act fast. Just as my lungs were burning and I thought I might actually lose consciousness, I managed to work my hand into my pocket where my phone was. Thank God for emergency settings. I was able to activate the emergency call feature by pressing the side button multiple times, even though I couldn't see the screen. I heard the faint sound of the call connecting. 911, what's your emergency?" came the tinny voice from my pocket. Jessica immediately lifted the pillow, and both women froze. "Shit. She called 911, Amanda hissed. I could hear the operator asking for more information, so I mustered all my strength and whispered, "Help me. 2 women are trying to kill me. They poisoned my food." I managed to give David's address before Jessica grabbed the phone. "False alarm," Jessica said into the phone, trying to sound calm. "My mother-in-law is confused and having some kind of episode. She's fine." But it was too late. I could hear the operator saying that units were already being dispatched and asking Jessica to identify herself. Jessica hung up and looked at Amanda in panic. "We need to get out of here." "What about her?" Amanda pointed at me. "We'll say she had some kind of mental breakdown. That she was hallucinating or something." But they didn't have time to coordinate their story properly. Within minutes, I heard sirens approaching. Jessica quickly tried to clean up any evidence of additional substances, while Amanda attempted to help me back into my chair to make it look like I'd fallen naturally. When the paramedics and police arrived, I was barely conscious but coherent enough to tell them I'd been poisoned. They immediately began checking my vitals and asking Jessica and Amanda what I'd eaten and drunk. "She's just confused," Jessica kept saying. "She's been having a hard time since David died. I think she's having some kind of breakdown." But the paramedics weren't buying it. My symptoms were consistent with drug poisoning, and they found evidence of pills dissolved in my wine glass. One of the officers noticed bruising on my shoulder where Jessica had pushed me, and another officer found the pillow on the floor near where I'd been lying. "Ma'am, can you tell me what happened?" the officer asked me as the paramedics worked. With great effort, I explained about the dinner invitation, feeling sick after eating, and Jessica trying to smother me with a pillow. I told them about the conversation I'd overheard about finishing this and making it look like natural causes. Jessica immediately denied everything. "She's hallucinating. She's an old woman who's confused and grieving. She probably took too many of her own medications." But Amanda cracked under pressure. When the officer separated them for questioning, she started crying and admitted that Jessica had put something in my food to make me more agreeable about signing papers. "It wasn't supposed to hurt her," Amanda sobbed. "Jessica just wanted her to sign some inheritance papers. I didn't know she was going to try to suffocate her." The officers found the crushed sleeping pills in Jessica's purse, along with a small container of what turned out to be a veterinary sedative she'd obtained from her affair partner Marcus, who worked part-time at an animal clinic. As they were arresting Jessica, she was screaming at me. "You bitter old woman. David left everything to me. I'm his wife. You have no right to any of it." But her protests fell on deaf ears. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Jessica's carefully constructed facade completely crumbled. She began ranting about how she'd worked so hard to marry David and how she deserved his money more than his manipulative mother. Her words revealed the calculated nature of their entire relationship. "I spent 5 years pretending to love that boring man," she screamed as the officers led her toward their patrol car. 5 years of pretending to care about his stupid hobbies and his pathetic mother. I earned that money. Amanda, meanwhile, was sobbing uncontrollably and trying to distance herself from Jessica's outburst. "I didn't know she was going to try to kill you," she kept repeating to anyone who would listen. "I just thought we were going to scare you a little. I never wanted anyone to get hurt." But her claims of innocence rang hollow when officers found text messages on her phone discussing different methods of handling the old lady problem and researching online how various drugs would affect someone my age. That's when I delivered the news that left everyone in utter shock. "Actually, Jessica," I said, my voice getting stronger as the paramedics administered 4 fluids to help flush the drugs from my system, "David left everything to me. I've been waiting to see what kind of person you really were before I told you." The look on Jessica's face was priceless. Complete disbelief, followed by rage, followed by panic. Her carefully laid plans, her months of manipulation, her systematic theft from David, and ultimately her murder of my son, all of it had been for nothing. "That's impossible," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the commotion of the crime scene. But the officers were listening intently now, realizing that this assault case might be connected to something much larger. Detective Maria Rodriguez, who had arrived on scene to take statements, immediately called for backup investigators when she heard about the inheritance dispute. "Ma'am," Detective Rodriguez said to me gently, "are you saying that Mrs. Jessica Thompson believed she was inheriting her husband's estate, but legally everything belongs to you?" "That's correct," I confirmed. "My son changed his will 6 months before his death. Jessica was never entitled to anything beyond a small bequest." The detective's eyes widened as she began to understand the implications. "So Mrs. Thompson attempted to drug and potentially murder you for assets that were never legally hers to begin with?" "Exactly. And I believe my son suspected she might do something like this, which is why he changed his will and left me detailed documentation about her behavior." Robert Chen, whom I had called earlier and asked to stand by, arrived just as the police were finishing their initial investigation. He had copies of David's will and was able to confirm to the officers that I was indeed the sole beneficiary of David's estate. "Mr. David Thompson changed his will 6 months ago," Robert explained to the stunned officers. "Everything was left to his mother, Margaret Thompson. Mrs. Jessica Thompson was left a small bequest of $50,000. Jessica completely lost it at that point. She started screaming that it wasn't fair, that David had been manipulated by his controlling mother, that she deserved everything as his wife. The officers had to restrain her as she tried to lunge at me while I sat on the stretcher. "You manipulative old bitch," she screamed. "You poisoned him against me. You stole my inheritance." Amanda was crying and trying to distance herself from Jessica, claiming she'd been manipulated and hadn't known about the attempted murder. But the evidence clearly showed both women were involved in the poisoning, and Jessica's attempt to smother me was witnessed by Amanda, who had done nothing to stop it. At the hospital, the doctors confirmed I'd been given a combination of prescription sleep medication and a mild veterinary sedative that could have been dangerous in larger doses or for someone with certain health conditions. They had to monitor me for several hours to ensure there wouldn't be any lasting effects. The next day, Robert came to the hospital with more shocking news. While searching David's house as part of the investigation, police had found Jessica's laptop, which contained evidence of her affair with Marcus going back over 2 years. They also found email correspondence between Jessica and Amanda discussing David's accident. But the digital evidence went far deeper than we initially realized. The forensic computer analyst who examined Jessica's devices found deleted files that revealed the true extent of her planning. Hidden in encrypted folders were detailed research files about inheritance law, life insurance policies, and methods for making murders look like accidents. One particularly chilling document was titled Project Timeline and contained a month-by-month plan for David's murder, starting from a full year before his death. The document outlined Jessica's strategy for isolating David from his friends and family, systematically stealing money from his accounts to fund her post-murder lifestyle, and researching various methods for killing him without suspicion. The timeline showed that Jessica had initially considered poisoning David slowly over several months, making his death appear to be from natural causes or illness. She'd researched various substances that would be difficult to detect in an autopsy and had even gone so far as to create fake medical symptoms by putting small amounts of these substances in David's food to establish a pattern of health problems. But she'd ultimately decided that a car accident would be less likely to trigger a thorough investigation, especially if David appeared to have been driving erratically due to fatigue or stress. The plan was diabolical in its thoroughness. She'd spent months laying the groundwork by telling people that David had been working too hard and seemed tired and stressed. Even more disturbing were the detailed financial projections Jessica had created, showing exactly how she planned to spend David's money after his death. She'd already picked out a new house in the Hamptons, researched expensive cars she wanted to buy, and even made preliminary contact with a travel agent about a round-the-world cruise that would cost over $100,000. The files also revealed that Jessica had been in communication with Marcus about their plan for months. Text messages between them showed that Marcus had been promised a significant portion of David's inheritance in exchange for his help with the murder. They'd even discussed getting married after an appropriate mourning period and moving to another state where they wouldn't be known. "Margaret, I think you need to see this," Robert said grimly, showing me printed emails. They'd been planning something for months. The emails revealed that Jessica and Amanda had been researching ways to inherit David's money faster. They discussed everything from divorce, which Jessica ruled out because of the prenup, to accidents. One email from Jessica to Amanda, sent just 2 weeks before David's death, said, "I'm tired of waiting for him to die naturally. We need to speed this up." Another email from Amanda suggested they research how to make accidents look natural and included links to articles about car brake failures. But perhaps the most damning evidence was a series of practice runs Jessica had documented. She'd been testing different methods of sabotaging David's car for months, using rental cars to experiment with brake line cuts and other mechanical failures. She'd even rented the same model car that David drove to perfect her technique. The forensic analyst also found evidence that Jessica had been researching my habits and routines for weeks before David's death. She had detailed notes about my daily schedule, the layout of my apartment building, and even information about my medical conditions and medications. It was clear that planning my murder had been part of her strategy from the very beginning. I felt sick reading them, but the worst was yet to come. The police investigation into David's car accident was reopened based on this new evidence. What they found was horrifying. David's car had been tampered with. The brake lines had been cut in a way designed to fail after a certain amount of driving, making it look like normal wear and tear. Security footage from David's office parking garage showed Marcus accessing David's car the night before the accident, using Jessica's key card to enter the building. Actually, the investigation revealed that David's car had been sabotaged in a more sophisticated way than simple brake line cutting. Marcus, who had mechanical training from his previous job at an auto repair shop, had installed a small device that would gradually compromise the brake fluid system over several hours of driving. This method would make the brake failure appear to result from a manufacturing defect or normal wear, rather than obvious sabotage. My son hadn't died in an accident. He'd been murdered by his own wife and her sister, with help from her lover. The revelation hit me like a truck. I'd spent weeks thinking I'd lost David to a tragic accident, when in reality, these monsters had killed him for his money. Money that they didn't even legally have a right to because of David's foresight in changing his will. The investigation revealed that David's car had been sabotaged in a sophisticated way. Rather than simply cutting brake lines, which would cause immediate and obvious failure, Marcus had installed a small device that would gradually compromise the brake fluid system over several hours of driving, making the failure appear to be from natural wear or a manufacturing defect. Jessica, Amanda, and Marcus were all arrested and charged with first-degree murder in David's death, plus attempted murder and assault charges for what they did to me. The evidence was overwhelming, particularly the emails and the tampered car. During the trial, more details emerged about their plan. Jessica had been slowly poisoning David with small amounts of the same veterinary sedatives for weeks before his death, making him drowsy and affecting his reaction time. The plan was that even if he survived the brake failure, the drugs in his system would impair his ability to respond to the emergency. They'd also planned to kill me from the beginning. Once Jessica inherited everything, or so she thought, I would have been next. They'd already discussed making my death look like natural causes related to grief and old age. But the most shocking revelation came when prosecutors revealed that this wasn't Jessica's first marriage to a wealthy man. Her first husband had died in a boating accident 5 years earlier, and she'd inherited his substantial estate. The case had never been fully investigated, but with this new evidence, authorities in California were reopening that investigation as well. Jessica, it turned out, was a serial killer who specialized in marrying wealthy men and murdering them for their money. During sentencing, I was allowed to give a victim impact statement. I looked directly at Jessica as I spoke. "You didn't just kill my son," I told her. "You destroyed my faith in humanity." David was a good man who worked hard for everything he had. He was kind, generous, and loved deeply. You took advantage of that love and murdered him in cold blood for money that you thought you deserved but had never earned. But David knew who you really were, I continued. In his final months, he saw through your lies and manipulation. He protected his legacy and ensured you would never benefit from his death. Even from beyond the grave, my son outsmarted you. Jessica showed no remorse during sentencing. She maintained her innocence despite overwhelming evidence and even tried to claim that I had somehow framed her. The judge wasn't buying it. Jessica received life in prison without the possibility of parole for David's murder, plus an additional 25 years for the attempted murder of me. Amanda got 15 years as an accessory to murder and for her role in poisoning me. Marcus received 20 years for his part in tampering with David's car. The California investigation into Jessica's first husband's death is still ongoing, but prosecutors are confident they have enough evidence to charge her with that murder as well, which could result in the death penalty. As for me, I inherited everything David wanted me to have, but it came with a responsibility I take seriously. I've established a foundation in David's name that provides scholarships for young entrepreneurs and supports domestic violence victims. I've also donated money to organizations that investigate suspicious deaths, hoping to prevent other families from going through what we did. I still live in my modest apartment. The $12 million mansion holds too many bad memories, and frankly, it was never really my style anyway. I've put it on the market and plan to donate the proceeds to charity. David's software company is being run by his former business partner, who knew and respected David's vision. The profits from the company fund the foundation and ensure David's legacy lives on in a positive way. People sometimes ask me if I regret not telling Jessica about the will sooner, thinking it might have prevented the attempt on my life. But honestly, I don't. Jessica's true nature needed to be exposed, and if I'd revealed the will immediately, she might have succeeded in killing me and finding some other way to contest it. David's foresight in changing his will and documenting Jessica's crimes literally saved my life. He knew that if something happened to him, Jessica would come after me next, and he made sure I'd have both the resources and evidence needed to protect myself. The hardest part of all this isn't the money or the legal battles. It's knowing that my son spent his final months aware that his wife was trying to kill him, feeling isolated and scared, but still taking the time to protect me. I wish he'd come to me sooner, wish I could have helped him escape before it was too late. But I take comfort in knowing that Jessica never got what she wanted. She thought she was so clever, so manipulative, so entitled to wealth she never earned. Instead, she's spending the rest of her life in a prison cell, while David's money is being used to help people and honor his memory. Sometimes justice isn't immediate, but it is inevitable. Jessica learned that the hard way. The truth is, David's real inheritance wasn't the money or the houses or the company. It was the love he had for people and his desire to make the world a better place. That's the legacy I'm committed to continuing with the resources he left behind. And every day, I'm grateful that my son was smart enough to see through Jessica's manipulation and protect us both, even when he couldn't protect himself. Jessica thought she was marrying a wealthy, naive man she could easily manipulate and eventually murder for his fortune. Instead, she chose someone who was not only smarter than her but who had a mother willing to fight for justice no matter what it cost. She picked the wrong family to mess with, and now she's paying the price for the rest of her life. That's my story. Sometimes the good guys do win, even when it seems impossible. David may be gone, But his love and protection continue to guide me every day. And Jessica? Well, she's exactly where she belongs.